An heiress to the Seagram's fortune will spend the next 7 years behind bars for her role in the NXIVM sex cult case.
Why would the daughter of a billionaire join a cult and give them millions of dollars? And what kind of manipulative man could convince her to do that? Today on the Nexus, we're looking at the disturbing case of Claire Bronfman and Keith Raniere. 41-year-old Bronfman is the daughter of the late Edgar Bronfman Sr., who ran his family drinks empire called Seagram's. He was worth $2.6 billion, and his daughter's wealth is estimated to be as much as $500 million. Last week, she was sentenced to nearly 7 years in prison for the crimes she committed with Keith Raniere, the leader of a sort of expensive self-help group called NXIVM. Now, Raniere doesn't look like much, but somehow he convinced Bronfman and many other women to join his group, including Hollywood actress Allison Mack. Mack and Claire Bronfman helped him run NXIVM, but most of the other women were victims of the group's cruelty, which included physically branding them. In a moment, we'll hear from a former NXIVM trainer who set up one of the group's centers, an investigative journalist who exposed some of NXIVM's darkest practices, and a cult investigator who's helped families trying to get their loved ones out of the group. But first, a quick look at NXIVM and the man behind it, Keith Raniere.
Our main emphasis, our main belief is to have people experience more joy in their lives. And from that, all sorts of interesting effects appear to happen. When conventional solutions don't work, maybe the unconventional way of thinking does.
NXIVM was founded by Nancy Saltzman and Keith Raniere in 1998. Keith Raniere was supposedly the world's smartest man with a 240 IQ. From the outside, it looked like just a normal organization that offered self-help seminars.
They offered a host of expensive workshops that you could take to learn to, help reach your personal and professional goals.
You reach into their very essence and you meet a unique individual.
I don't know why, that makes me want to cry. It's beautiful.
A jury in New York has found the leader of a self-help group guilty of 7 counts of sex trafficking and racketeering.
Keith Raniere has been convicted of running a sex cult where women were kept as virtual prisoners to service him.
The so-called self-help guru allegedly coerced women into having sex with him and also branded them as part of an initiation ceremony.
There's no word to describe my relief.
Breaking news right now that Smallville actress Allison Mack is pleading guilty. She's facing charges over what's being called a sex trafficking cult, the group NXIVM.
The FBI thinks that she was bringing younger women into the group for the purpose of having sex with the leader.
An heiress to the Seagram's fortune will spend the next 7 years behind bars for her role in the NXIVM sex cult case.
Claire Bronfman, heiress to the Seagram's liquor fortune. She's accused of using her family's wealth to help bankroll the alleged NXIVM cult located in upstate New York.
This was actually a criminal organization.
We as humans feel we have free will, and that's sort of interesting, but doesn't mean we do.
This was a human experiment.
Okay, let's bring in our guest now, and we're going to start with Susan Dones, a trainer at NXIVM between 2000 and 2009. Susan, welcome to the show. Let me start by asking you, did you know that it was a cult when you joined?
Absolutely not. It looked like just a normal training program when I went, and it was actually at the time when I started. It was called Executive Success Programs, and what I was looking for was something to bring to the West Coast to help people be more successful in their lives.
Tell us about the moment you met Keith Raniere and the others. You went from the West Coast to Albany, New York. What happened then?
Well, we started it out in the 16-day program, and we didn't even meet Keith Raniere until the 5th day. He came in and did what they called a forum, where you could ask him a number of questions. And up until that time, everybody showed up in professional attire that was teaching the program, business attire, that kind of thing. And Keith showed up and he's in, sweats and, that kind of thing. And I wasn't really impressed with him. I thought, gosh, this guy's representing the program, and he shows up in, you know, a, a set of sweats, and he just went on and on and on to kind of, in my opinion, ad nauseum, and it happened to be New Year's Eve. And then they were having a New Year's Eve party for the staff, and so they invited us all to come to the New Year's Eve party. And people kind of glommed onto him like he was, I don't know, like kind of this hero worship kind of thing. And I'm not into that kind of thing. So I just kind of avoided him that evening.
So what made you want to join then? I mean, you ended up staying for 9 years.
Well, I liked the training program, and so I was 3,000 miles away, and I got to keep my training program clean, that kind of thing.
Did you ever see any cult-like behavior during your time there?
Well, I found I recognized early on that he was sleeping with other women, but at that time I thought it was consensual. And so, that's not my business. If women want to consent to sleep with the leader of the organization, that wasn't my business. And so later on, I found out that there was this whole manipulative setup in regards to that. And then right before I left, Nancy Salzman, I was at her house, and she kind of had a meltdown, and she told me a lot about criminal activity that was going on. And I left shortly after that.
How comes you were able to break away and many others weren't?
Because I had a moral compass and a strong sense of self when I went in, and they were not able to break that while I was in. And so I was an endangerment to them because they couldn't break that. They tried to get me to commit a crime by not paying my taxes, and I constantly refused to do that. And after I left, I figured out that that was a way to get collateral over me.
You testified at Claire Bronfman's trial. What did you say to them?
Well, I testified at her sentencing, and what I did point out is that her importance in the company was her financial influence, and she said she was always ashamed of her wealth, and that it made her feel self-loathing and ashamed and stuff like that. And that she found herself in NXIVM, and that those things were cleared up in NXIVM. And I said that in this moment in the courtroom is that what she should really feel is self-loathing and shame and fear for what was about to happen. Because what she did is she paid for not just Keith, but his wolf pack, the women that tortured all the other people within NXIVM. She paid for all of that. And if she had just closed her checkbook, she would find out really how important she was to the organization, which was nothing. And all they wanted her for was her money.
Did you ever see or hear anything about women being physically branded?
Oh, no, that happened long after I left.
Let's just skip forward a few years then to after you left, and talk about the women who were branded. Let's hear from Catherine Oxenberg. Her daughter, India Oxenberg, was in the NXIVM cult. Apparently, she was branded. Catherine Oxenberg, related to European royalty, used to act in Dynasty. Here she is describing the situation of her daughter back in 2017.
My daughter was involved in this kind of slave master situation, and that apparently they were all having sex with Keith, and that they were supposed to recruit other young women to be slaves as their assignments, and they were giving out assignments to have sex with him. And then I found out that she could be branded with his initials, and I lost my mind. I mean, there went the cool parent of tolerating what my child, I mean, she's over 18, but I was like, this is very, very dangerous.
Well, around the time of that interview, Catherine Oxenberg went to investigative journalist Frank Parlato. Frank, why did she come to you with this story?
Catherine Oxenberg came to me because she was urgently trying to get her daughter out of this health-destroying, mind-bending cult, and she was desperate. And at that time, I was the only media outlet that was writing about NXIVM.
Right, and you were writing about them because, well, somewhat out of revenge, if you like. they had come after you about something that had happened or allegedly happened years before when they had employed you to clean up their image. Tell us about that. Back in 2007, I believe.
Well, I was originally retained. I was never a member of the cult, but I was a consultant hired as a publicist to help them improve their image in the media, which at that time was taking somewhat of a hit. They were being called a cult in the media, and they retained me to attempt to rescue or improve their image. And in my stay there, I was able to affect some positive change, but we had a falling out when I discovered that the leader of the cult, Keith Raniere, had likely embezzled about $90 million from the heiresses, Seagram heiresses, and members of the NXIVM cult, Claire and Sarah Bronfman. So I was, when I got close to, I think, putting my finger on where that $90 million went, I was fired.
You went your separate ways. Then suddenly in 2013, the Bronfman sisters alleged to the FBI that during that period of employment, you stole $1 million from them. First of all, did you steal from them? Secondly, what happened with that case?
Well, I actually recovered for them $26 million in real estate that was being essentially their partner had absconded with a sizable amount of the 26 million. I recovered the full 26 million, and I was paid for my services the sum of $1 million. When they fired me, they wanted me to return every penny that I had earned. This is their natural way, picking a fight with people, using the Bronfman wealth to try to destroy their enemy. And, you know, I think Susan will attest to, because she fought back. Rick is here to attest. He fought back and won. Both of them won. They spare no expense in going after their enemies and trying to destroy them. So I was indicted by the FBI on these charges, and then in 2018, after a long 6 years of fighting, they dropped these charges. And at the same time, the same year, thanks to the work of the people here with us today and myself and others, we were able to publish enough important information that the FBI began an investigation, and Claire Bronfman, Keith Raniere, Allison Mack, Nancy Salzman, president of the company, her daughter Lauren Salzman, and the hapless bookkeeper Kathy Russell were all indicted. They were ultimately convicted, and with the exception of Claire Bronfman, who's already been sentenced, they are all awaiting sentencing for felony convictions.
Now, Frank, you mentioned a lot of names. Let's just take a moment and see how all of these people fit together in the NXIVM structure. Keith Raniere met Nancy Salzman in 1998. Months later, they formed NXIVM. Raniere already had experience running a pyramid scheme.
But Consumers Byline is wonderful, and it's working.
And Salzman was a psychiatric nurse and trained hypnotist. Both had an interest in neurolinguistic programming. They pulled in thousands of wealthy clients who were made to call him Vanguard and her Prefect. Sarah and Claire Bronfman joined NXIVM in the early 2000s, bringing with them their wealth and prestige. But even the Bronfman sisters couldn't mask NXIVM's strange activities for long. In 2003, cult investigator Rick Ross became the first to crack NXIVM's shell, describing their seminars as expensive brainwashing. A few months later, Forbes ran a scathing article titled "The World's Strangest Executive Coach," in which a worried Edgar Bronfman said, "I think it's a cult." Undeterred, Smallville actress Kristin Kreuk became involved in 2006. Her co-star, Allison Mack, was persuaded to join by Salzman and her daughter Lauren. While Kreuk left NXIVM, Mack rose through the ranks to run DOS, the so-called secret sorority within NXIVM that recruited more and more women, where they were blackmailed and allegedly branded. The story of Doss's wicked ways was broken by journalist Frank Parlato in 2017. And now they've all been convicted. Claire Bronfman, the first to be sentenced, pleaded guilty to identity theft and harbouring illegal immigrants. Alison Mack, Nancy Saltzman, and her daughter Lauren all pleaded guilty to racketeering charges. Keith Raniere maintains his innocence but was found guilty on all charges, including sexual exploitation of a child, sex trafficking, and forced labour conspiracy. He'll be sentenced on October the 27th. Prosecutors want him jailed for life. Frank, you spent quite a lot of time with Keith Raniere when you were working with them back in 2007, 2008. Please explain how this very ordinary, some people would even say less than ordinary man, put all of this together, managed to manipulate and control so many women and some men, and despite the convictions, many are still refusing to turn their back on him.
Well, I think that one of the key signatures that Keith Raniere employed in making himself appear to be more than he was that he had an inner core, an inner harem of women whose sole purpose in life was to edify him and to make him look good to, in particular, other women. So he built up a group of supporters that recruited other supporters. Susan has referred to this group as the Wolf Pack. And they really were, in a way, because they would bring in young women and they would groom and cultivate them. So it was women enforcing and manipulating other women to glorify Keith Raniere.
Well, let's move on to Rick Ross now. He's the cult investigator, one of the first people to publicly describe NXIVM as brainwashing its clients. That was back in 2003, Rick. What made you start investigating NXIVM?
I was retained professionally by a family that had 3 adult children in the executive success programs, and they wanted to get them out. And I was retained to do an intervention with each of them. 2 left, 1 stayed, and then the family commissioned reports that were written by a forensic psychiatrist and a clinical psychologist, which I published on the database culteducation.com. After that, I was sued by Keith Raniere and NXIVM.
Right, so he came after you in the courts. It was a 14-year legal battle, and you won that.
Yes, it took 14 years of legal battling. And Raniere is estimated to have spent $5 million during that time pursuing me. If I had not been represented pro bono by some of the best lawyers in the country, I would have spent $2 million defending myself.
Now, during this legal battle, you would have sat across the table from him at times. What did you make of him? You've studied cults for many years. Was he a typical cult leader?
He wasn't very charismatic. Many cult leaders are very charismatic, dynamic people that attract people to them. Keith Raniere's particular mask or facade that he used was a kind of professorial, philosophical guru who was soft-spoken and quiet. But when I was in extended talks with him at court-ordered mediation, at times he would lose his cool when he was challenged, and he would become red-faced, angry. He was used to being agreed with constantly. And if you found something in error that he said and pointed it out to him, he became really upset.
He set himself up as the world's smartest man, had the highest IQ in the world of 240, say. Can you please explain how that ridiculous myth got started?
Well, this was just his claims. I sat through his deposition when he was under oath, and he admitted that none of the claims that he made could be substantiated other than by him claiming it or by some anecdotal story. In fact, when the government released his grades from Polytechnic Rensselaer, where he studied and got an undergraduate degree, his grades were not very good. And I think Raniere had average intelligence.
So he has average intelligence, you know, very ordinary looks. He's not that charismatic. Can you tell me, upon what was this cult based? I mean, where was his manipulation drawing its strength from?
Well, if Keith Raniere did have a genius and he was like a savant, he could smell, he could sense where people's weaknesses were, where their vulnerabilities were. And when he perceived a weakness, a crack, he would then drill into it methodically to exploit the person and leverage that for greater control. So when it came to being manipulative and understanding people's foibles and how he could gaslight them, how he could manipulate their emotions, he was very good at that.
Would you say he had the similar sort of qualities to a very good salesman?
I would say it was beyond that. I mean, he developed that salesmanship when he ran a multi-level marketing scheme called Consumer Byline. But I think it went much further than that. And in particular, it became rather misogynistic, the way that he dealt with women. He would set women up so that if there was a problem with his business, with anything, that a woman would take the fall. And in a way, it seemed to me that he humiliated women. He subjected them to extreme control and dominance. And sex for Raniere seemed to be about power and control, not about anything physical.
In 2009, the NXIVM group managed to pull off a massive coup. They persuaded the Dalai Lama to address their group, and he even presented Keith Raniere with a white scarf. Tell me, how important was that in maintaining the group's credibility?
That was a pivotal point. I mean, the Dalai Lama had received communications from many people explaining to him why it was not in his best interest to appear. And in fact, colleges and universities refused to provide a venue. Nevertheless, he chose to appear regardless of all the information that he received. And I was told that the Bronfmans made a generous contribution to some charity associated with the Dalai Lama that may have prompted him to do so.
Frank?
In the Dalai Lama's defense, he is under siege by the Chinese communist government. The Bronfmans made a very sizable contribution, which I believe was $2 million. When he did make his appearance, he did, in his lecture, ask the media to investigate Keith Raniere, and I can provide you with that clip. And in addition to that, he asked Keith Raniere, right while he was on stage, to please be transparent, and if you've done something wrong, admit it.
A final question for you, Rick Ross. Susan was able to break out. She was strong enough to do so. Many women, the ones who have been convicted amongst them, and even some who, to this day, dance outside of his jail in protest at his incarceration, still believe in him. They will not turn their back on him.
You know, I took classes for many years with Executive Success Programs, which is affiliated with NXIVM. I think what's really sad is that we're out here doing something really good that is helping a lot of people. And people can't get past this idea that we were in something called a sex cult, which I don't even know what that is. I certainly was never part of a sex cult.
Can you please explain why this is still happening, even though he's been discredited and is in jail? And will they ever see him for what he really is?
They may not. He persuaded them that any critic was involved in persecution. He would describe people that were negative about his program as being suppressive people who were not worthy of consideration. And I can tell you, when I was in the courtroom testifying against Keith Raniere, and I looked him in the eye, or I tried to, he has no sympathy, no empathy, and no conscience about what he has done. And he continues to feed the residue of supporters' lies about his innocence and that he's some type of philosophical martyr for a cause of that he describes as rational inquiry, his philosophy. And these people that are continuing to be loyal to him, they have invested many years of their lives, a great deal of their money, and they feel that they have equity in this, and that it is it is something they find very difficult to consider, to face the reality that all along he was a fraud, and that they gave their money and their lives for nothing.
Well, Rick Ross, Frank Parlato, and Susan Dones, thank you all so much for your contributions to the Nexus today, and thank you at home and on your phones for watching. Remember, you can see this episode again or any of our previous episodes on our channel on YouTube. Just type in Nexus TRT World. Until next week then, goodbye.